Hello, everyone. It's me, Madam Pamita. I haven't even put my headphones in my, oh my goodness gracious, anything. I'm just winging it today. It is deadline week for my next book where I'm my last week to write. And so I've been there, Kristoffer. Excited to talk to you. Um, for those of you who don't know, we're doing a Meet My Familiar, and this is the little format where I interview amazing magic makers, friends, colleagues, amazing creators, writers, deck designers, and we're going to meet with one today. Kristoffer Hughes, amazing Kristoffer Hughes, is going to be joining me, and we're going to be talking about his familiar. All right, let's get him in this room. Talk to you when Kristoffer, when you come on, I'm like, oh my gosh, you'll sympathize with me. Hello,
Hello.
hello, hello.
How
Oh my
are you?
gosh, I am in deadline mode for my book. This is my last week, and I'm cramming it all in. You know how it
I
is,
feel
right?
pain. Mine is slightly, ever so slightly late.
I got an extension on my book.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, because I was.
So, the struggle is real, Madam Pamita. Struggle-
I know. Kristoffer is an amazing author, creator. He has created my most. Are your pronouns he, him? Is that you? He, him,
Yes,
she, her, they, them. You're
yes.
all of the above.
Above.
Yes. Um, Kristoffer has created an amazing, one of my favorite new decks, which is the Bee Tarot, which is, oh my gosh, so good. I have it over there. I'm going to go grab it because I want everyone to see how gorgeous it is. Hold on a second. I'm very discombobulated. Please excuse me. Everyone needs to see how gorgeous this deck is. Ugh, so I have to bring it out. It's very disorganized. I just had a meeting 2 minutes before we got on here with my editor, so that's why nothing was prepared. Look at this gorgeous deck. Oh my gosh. When I saw that this deck was coming out, I was so eager and so excited because you, as a druid who connects so deeply in kind of, I think, animist ways, if we look at druids, they really are that kind of legacy of the really ancient animism where we see life force in all living things. All things really have life force, and the bees are so deeply magical.
Incredible.
And so, yeah, so I was so excited to get my hands on this, and of course I did get my hands on this
They
deck. And
did a beautiful job of it, didn't they? And
oh
I don't know if you noticed, but they've put a wash along the side of the pages, along the edges of the page. And I remember being at the Llewellyn office, and they had like 120 copies for me to sign, and they were stacked up, and it just looked like this enormous um, frame, beehive frame that was sitting
yeah,
on the desk. All
so
together,
gorgeous.
they look stunning.
I
They've
mean,
done such
so
a great job.
beautiful.
That's
So
so,
beautiful. I mean, so this, you are saying they did a beautiful job, and yes, it takes a village to create something, but these the cards and the messages of the cards are so wonderfully rich and deep, and I just love this deck. So,
oh, thank you. I
yes. So, are we going to talk about bees today, bee
yeah,
familiars, or are we going to talk about all the
yeah.
familiars?
Definitely. So we've been, well, when I say we, I mean the royal we, right? So we have been keeping bees at home for, I guess, about 25 years, something like that. But I'm the beekeeper's wife. So my husband's a beekeeper. He has bees on in various locations on the island. And and it felt like a natural progression to want to explore not only my love of tarot, but also the magic of the bee queendom in collaboration with the tarot. Because I don't think that there's a single civilization on Earth that hasn't had some kind of connection with the bees. Apart from maybe the most remotest parts of the Arctic or Antarctic, maybe. But every other civilization and societies have had not only a physical relationship and a nutritious one with bees, but also a deeply spiritual and magical one. They imbibe into so many mythologies, so much folklore. The bees are, they seem to have this almost symbiotic relationship with humans. And I really wanted to explore that with my love of tarot and see whether I could fathom and design a deck that. It was really difficult though, because in researching it, there's so much out there. There's so much that you can't distill into 78 images. So sometimes it was incredibly perplexing and frustrating that I had to leave some stuff out or choose a priority over one thing over another. And but what came out, I'm really pleased with. And of course, the first people I told when the copies arrived were the bees.
Of course, you tell the bees. I love it. This is like, as I go in, of course, I knew about telling the bees in the, let's say in the British Isles or in the, in the Celtic lands, of course, and in England as well. And we see that tradition even being carried on today, where when the queen died, that the royal beekeeper told the bees, right? But this has existed. I mean, when you look, I think this is something you'll find fascinating as a druid and practicing in a I think you practice in a Celtic tradition of druidry, right? Welsh
Yes.
tradition, Celtic
Yeah.
tradition. And when we look at, when I was looking, which I'm familiar with Celtic traditions because why we grew up I grew up in America where, English speaking, English language things are going to be more at the forefront for us. But when I was researching Slavic magic and finding out about bee traditions in Slavic lands, I'm like, and many other traditions besides beekeeping, I'm like, this sounds like Celtic druidry. This sounds like Celtic druidry. They practice in oak groves, they do this, they do that. And when I learned at the time I was researching that the Celts came from Central Europe and migrated east and west, I'm like, oh, this helps us identify that this is such an old tradition.
Mm.
When we
Yeah.
see it way, way, way in the east and way, way, way in the west, and they're both doing similar things, I'm like, this goes back then to that earliest days where this information that the Celts were disseminated there. So it started somewhere in there and was disseminated east and west. So a
Yeah.
lot of the traditions, like talking to the bees are messengers to spirit and to divine, all of these things are there, and they're old enough that we know that they weren't transferred later, that they were transferred earlier, and they had to have been some of the earliest traditions. So as you mentioned, oh my
Last
gosh.
last February, as part of I presented a Welsh language documentary on death practices around the world, and we went to India. And it was my first ever visit to India last February, to the city of the dead, Varanasi. And there are bees everywhere there. And what surprised me the most was that in Varanasi, I met Hindu druids. So people who blend the wisdom of Hinduism and the Indo-European influence of Druidry. And some of them do it because they may have a Celtic parent or a Celtic ancestral parent and a Hindu parent. And the remarkable thing is that within the Hindi language, within Sanskrit, there are words that we use in modern Welsh that have the same root. They come from even that region. So even though commonly for a number of decades they thought the Celts migrated from the Xinjiang provinces of ancient China across the Russian steppe, fell into Central Europe, into Austria, and then disseminated via iron. But there's also been evidence of late that they were also in the sub-Himalayan tundras as well. And these Hindruids, particularly up in the regions of Assam in northern India, so much of the wisdom of the bees is incorporated into those unique spiritual practices. And I found that surprising, but also incredibly inspiring that, oh my word, there's so much more out there waiting for us to discover. And here in Britain, there's an old English adage that is, I think, in the inside cover of the Bee Tarot. And it's an old proverb which says, ask the wild bee what the old druids knew. And I rather love that, and particularly that it identifies ask the wild bee, you know? So
Yes.
there's like an implication there that those bees that live deep in the forest, deep in the dark of the woodland, and that the somehow or another the ancient druids would collaborate with them or communicate with them. And and for us here living on the Isle of Anglesey, it was a no-brainer that the wisdom of the bees was bound to influence not only my spirituality but my partner's spirituality, and then also, you know, the teachings of the Druid order that I had, because they're just a font of magical wisdom
Oh my
and
gosh.
also logical wisdom. You know, they cover all the bases. So when Llewellyn asked if I would be willing to design a tarot deck of that nature, that was a no-brainer.
Yes. I love it.
And then Nadia Turner, who lives in the mountains of Melbourne in South Australia, we eventually settled on her to decipher this mumbled up jumble of it that I had in my head, my dreadful illustrations that I would never subject the world to see. And just did such an amazing job. So we've tried to cover not just, you know, the honeybee, but also the other categorizations of bees as well. And some of them are scorned, you know, like the hornet. I mean, the hornet can be a bit of a shady little bugger, but they still have an incredible role to play.
I love that.
With,
I mean, the differences between how there's different energies with each of these insects,
mm,
and how, you know, when we think about the honeybee cooperating so deeply as opposed to that maybe solitary bumblebee that goes around pollinating, doing all these wonderful things, but
yeah,
exists only just in our, you know, it doesn't make anything for us that we
yeah,
could use, and a hornet or a wasp, how those energies are so protective. I think of them being so protective, and
yeah.
yeah.
Course they pollinate, you know, so there's this whole pollination thing that's going on with all these species of bees. So I've always considered that the bees are familiar spirits that live at the bottom of the garden, and they offer us a portal and an avenue by which to connect not only with the natural world but most specifically our locality and the flavors of life, and also what is happening to life within our particular region. And undeniably, the climate here has changed. We get significantly more storms, we get significantly more cold and wet weather than we used to. And that's reflected in the way that the bees are behaving and the way the plant life is behaving. So they offer a really practical tool to understanding the bounty of nature around us. But then there's all this hidden magical stuff. And even when I read about the science of bees, you know, and they claim that they understand things like the waggle dance, I love that it's still steeped in mystery, that we kind of maybe know on a scientific level how that works, but the fact that it works at all, you know, that this tiny little creature that is barely 3 centimeters long at the biggest returns to a hive. These guardian bees outside have their little cuffer cells open, and as soon as they pass that barrier, they become blind. It shuts down their eyes. And then inside the darkness of that hive, they perform a dance that all of the other bees can perceive, and then follow those instructions to within an accuracy of 3 feet to a plant in utter darkness. And I think if that isn't an exemplification of the power of hidden forces, of the unseen, of magical forces at work in our universe, I really don't know what is.
Right. I mean, it is that, you know, what I love about it, delving in, as I was delving into animals, now I'm writing a book about plants, and I'm talking about, I love the aspect that really and I'm a person that loves reading a scientific article about some new discovery. I subscribe to science magazines. I subscribe to archaeology magazines. I just love discovery, right?
Yeah.
And I think of, and when someone comes to me like wanting to learn magic, they're like, where should I begin? I said, think of it like a giant land that you're exploring, you can land anywhere on that map and then start from there and do your exploration. So if you love animal magic, start with animal magic. If you love plant magic, start with plant magic. If you love bees, start with bees. It's whatever is the thing that really is drawing or calling to your heart is the place to begin. But the same is true for science. There's so much territory that is yet to be discovered. And what we're finding, and I think you'll probably agree with this too, is that used to be science and spirituality were together, medieval times, alchemy in ancient times as well. We saw these two as connected. And then during the Enlightenment, they separated. Magic was bad and wrong, and science is right and good. But now we're seeing them actually, like that double helix, merging together again, where we see that science is catching up with the personal gnosis that witches and magic practitioners, druids, and other people who are deeply connected
We've always
to, right?
like
Right.
hello.
I know. Well, when I was writing The Witch's Guide to Animal Familiars, I wrote a section on bees. And one of the things that it didn't really occur to me until I started writing about them. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute. When we work with most insects, and I have a whole chapter on insects, I have a whole chapter on spiders, I have a whole chapter, we have all of this, in there. But when we are working with insects, in general, we cannot work with just one insect, right? You're not going to capture a butterfly, and that's a horrible thing to do, right? And keep it in a cage. It's meant to be living in nature, meant to be wild, right? So you're going to work with butterflies as a more collective energy, or more, non-particular, non-specific to one butterfly or one ladybug or whatever insect we're working with. The exception is honeybees,
Yeah,
or maybe a bumblebee that you have a little house for and you can see it going in and out of its house. So there's, but bees being the only domesticated insect.
yeah.
They're still a little
Oh,
wild, but they're not wild bees. They have a domestic quality to them, that you have that same, that same swarm coming back, or, that you have these connections that are consistent over time with a particular group of bees. But you're probably not going to connect to one individual bee, but connect to them as a unit, which they also have that quality of the unit being a single organism in some way. I think most beekeepers know
I,
that, right?
I think that's a really important message in the way in which bees operate as well, because when they leave the hive, they're behaving as individuals, but they behave as individuals in a non-hyper individuated way. So their entire goal, their entire function is the well-being of the hive, of the collective, yet they're able to have a certain degree of autonomy when they go out and into the sunshine. But when they return to the hive, they become almost a singular mind, and it's all for the benefit of the hive and the protection of it. So one of our hives can have upwards of 70 to 90,000 bees within it. And to go down there and sit quietly next to the hive and hear that delicious hum inside of it, to me, is almost the hum of the earth itself. It's the hum of mystery, and also of the amount that we as humans could learn when we do things to benefit the collective rather than to benefit this illusion that we've created in modernity of the hyper individuated self. And because I don't think for a moment that the druids of the past, the witches of the past, ever worked in a hyper individuated format, that they work for the benefit and in service to their communities. And I see that within the life cycle of the bees, and it fills me with just so much joy that they're able to transmit this gorgeous mystery. I mean, they don't particularly like it if I go too close to the hive, but I find that there's a certain magic in that as well, because they can detect Ian's pheromones. They know what his pheromones smell like. They know he doesn't mean them any harm or danger. So anybody else's pheromone, they're a little bit like, oh, hello, who are you?
Yeah.
But there have been occasions where something has happened. One example that I can think of was a mouse had managed to get into the hive. And of course, in defense, the bees had stung it to death, covered it in propolis, but it had partially blocked the entrance. But the bees knew that they were in danger, and they came to the house to get Ian. And
Wow.
how does that work? So there was suddenly a cloud, and I was, I think, washing the dishes or something. And suddenly they were all over the kitchen window. And I'm like, oh, hello, what's going on here? I'm like, Ian. And he's like, something's wrong. And he followed this cloud of bees down. And I hear these stories from beekeepers all the time of these incredible, magical, unexplainable dynamics and relationships that they have. And then, and although, you know, I have a particular interest in that aspect of the bees, I also love the other practical, magical aspect of what the bees offer us. And so my suit of pentacles in the bee tarot is all very abstract. It's about the things that we as humans have created from the bounty and gifts of the bees over the millennia. And I love how we have the bees, we have wax, we have propolis, we have pollen, we have these products that have come from our locality that I then use to create magical salves, magical lotions, magical bubbling potions, and everything from cosmetic lip balms to anti-wrinkle cream to energetically infused salves for using magical work, you know. So, and I find that offers the practitioner this delicious connection to landscape in a world where, you know, I think, oh, I need some mugwort. Oh, I'll just go to Amazon, you know, and
Yeah.
get mugwort.
Yes.
And it's like, well, actually, are the bees foraging for mugwort? You know, is there mugwort nearby? And if there is, and there invariably is here, then that can be used in conjunction with what they produce to create and further not only our understanding of magical practical application, but it reinforces that relationship between us and these tiny, tiny little wise creatures that we are so utterly reliant upon for the well-being of our world. And so even though we've always had a cat, right? So we've always had a cat. So Lily the cat, she's whatever magical situation we're in, Lily's there. So she wants in on any of the oogie boogie shenanigans. But I think that is probably just because she's a part of our family. And I've not necessarily ever considered Lily to be my my familiar as such in that particular sense. Oddly, mine has always been insects, you know, and that's rather peculiar, isn't it? So I was a little saddened on Monday morning. I woke up and I've had an enormous, and she's so, so beautiful, an enormous house spider. She's the biggest house spider I've ever seen. And she's been living just behind my headboard of my bed. And on Monday morning, when I woke up, I opened my eyes and she was sitting on the pillow, on the empty pillow next to me. And I could tell immediately that she was leaving because it's warmed up. So she's had her sanctuary, she's had her respite, but now it's time for her to venture into the outside world. And I'm convinced that that moment was, can you open the window for me, please? So I opened
Yes.
the window and she's gone. But oh my word, Bettina, I called her Bettina. And Bettina and I have had the most amazing conversations over the winter. I tell her all of my woes. You know,
She's your
but
therapist.
yeah, but my mother, you know, the biggest arachnophobe on the planet, is like, oh my God, how could you do that? Like, but she's the most beautiful creature. And I can learn so much from her, you know. So it's peculiar, isn't it, how there's a tendency, I guess, especially when somebody is new to contemporary Western paganism, to, you know, find a very stereotypical animal familiar. And mine was always insects. So in the very beginning, you know, centuries ago now, I was always a little bit embarrassed to say, oh, mine's a spider.
I
And
love spiders. So
oh,
you know, the spider fan club, the insect fan club, I'm here
oh,
for it. Except
good.
some. I don't like roaches. I'm not gonna get on board with the roaches
Yes.
or fleas.
So,
Those are ticks.
yes.
You know what's interesting is like my biggest fear is ticks. Like somebody asked,
Uh,
like, what's your biggest fear? I said ticks because of the disease. But it's not the tick itself, it's the disease that they spread,
yeah.
I think is
Well,
I gotta specify that.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, one of the things I discovered also as I was doing the book is that, you know, when you were talking about sitting next to the hive or sitting close to the hive and hearing the sound, and that I think of that sound being almost maybe possibly the origin of the Om, you know, this vibratory spiritual sound that's long and extended can almost be like that. But there's a place somewhere in Europe, I think in Romania, maybe, that they have a hotel that's with beehives underneath the floorboards. Are you aware of this?
No, I've got to go there.
You can spend the night in this hostel, this hotel, this little motel, and sleep above buzzing bees in the
Okay.
hives that are in underneath I guess it's like on a platform and the hives are underneath, and just receive that healing energy of the bee sounds all night long. Maybe you need to build a little cabin on your property with beehives under and just have
Under,
this.
yeah, yeah, because it certainly is deeply resonant, and like you say, it's like a mixture of, you know, an sound is a very very soft consonant, you know,
Yeah,
but yeah, it does sound very much like the um,
yeah,
and I find it I find it very nurturing and very calming, particularly if I've had, you know, a particularly stressful day. And I found during the COVID pandemic, I was still working for His Majesty's Coroner at the time, and we were working like God knows how many hours in the
mm,
most, you know, dreadful, dreadful scenarios in pathology. And but we had a heat wave for that entire duration. It was really hot and the bees were flourishing. And I think had it not have been for the bees at the bottom of the garden, I swear that I could have easily have become unhinged by everything that was going on. But I found they're particularly grounding, and their consistency and also their resilience for these tiny little creatures. They're so resilient, and I think I that rubbed off a bit, you know, that okay, I can be resilient.
mm,
I can learn from the bees, and of course now at the moment, well, hopefully they'll be waking up soon
yeah.
because the weather has started to warm up. But in the winter, we give them some supplementary food, and they're just happy in their winter cluster. But I still think it's important to tell them the news. So whenever, not necessarily anything significant, but my sister today just had a cat. So her and her partner just had a cat today, a little ginger Tom, and so I've gone and told the bees, you know, because
Love it.
that's a lovely bit of news, right?
Yeah, it's a new addition to the family, the extended family.
Yeah,
Absolutely, right? That's the kind of information that we are meant to be telling the bees. And I think, you know, we might look at this as like quaint folklore. Oh, you know, you're telling the bees when somebody dies or somebody is born or somebody's getting married or somebody, you know, these are the things that typically are in the lore of what you tell the bees. But I think if you scratch that surface a little bit, you see that there's something deeper there. Like, why is it that we're telling these additions and subtractions, let's say, to the family, or because they're connected to the spirit realm?
yeah,
You know very well that
yeah,
others who are watching might not know, but in Greece, the beehives were in these caverns and these cracks, and so
yeah.
they thought bees were coming from the lower world, from the underworld, that bees were going and traversing back and forth. These beliefs that the bees connect to the spirit realm are widespread, right?
Yep.
So,
So
yeah, yeah,
the other Mediterranean myth as well of bees rising from the carcass, you know, of a dead bull, that seemingly was devoid of any life, and yet suddenly a whole swarm of bees erupt out of this ball. And I found that in my professional capacity, that the bees were immensely helpful from a psychopompic perspective as well, because here, well, I think globally, but particularly in Celtic nations, they've always had this association of being able to transmit or take or carry messages between the living world and the ancestral world. And I found that was something that was very valuable in my life as a person within death services, that we could use those particular symbolisms. And again, particularly during COVID, when people weren't able to attend funeral homes, they weren't able to attend mortuaries or coroners' facilities. So we were having to create impromptu rituals for people in outside spaces so that they could assimilate this dreadful, dreadful grief that people haven't encountered in living memory. And I found that for me, using the symbology of the bees was particularly powerful, and also something that people would really be receptive to. Of course the bees can carry my message to my loved one. And so I've always found that even though we've kept bees at home, they've always had a particular impact, not only on my domestic situation, but also my spirituality and my profession. They've been a tertiary component of my life, and I deeply value that again, these tiny little creatures can have such an impact. And I also love nothing more than an afternoon session in the autumn with bubbling cauldrons and pots and pans of all sorts of shenanigans from the harvest. And because they work, on both levels, both a practical, physiological, and magical or subtle. They work, and so I've got to keep doing it.
Yes, of course. Oh my gosh. Going back to spider familiars, I am a spider appreciator, a big spider appreciator, have been since I was a child, love spiders. Always, if I had to take a spider out of the house, always with a glass and a little card or something so I could take it out gently and let it be free and outside. But I talk about, even though spiders aren't technically insects, or we could call them bugs, right? That
Yeah,
really bees and spiders do have that quality also, apart from other insects, where we can have a one-to-one relationship, like you were talking about, which is also, I think, when we meet beings in their realm, it's not anthropomorphizing the spider, but
mm,
meeting each other halfway,
yeah,
where you can these wonderful relationships, whether it is with a whole hive of 90,000, or a butterfly that flies through your yard, or a ladybug that lands on your hand, or a spider that lives in your house. They give us this window of opportunity of entering into their world. And I think that is where the magic can really be very, very profound, very deep, very transformative, is when we don't, I mean, I name everything too. I'm
yeah,
like you, I name everything too, but we also, I know you and your deep and rich practice that you've been practicing for so long. You're entering into the spider's realm. We're not looking at it like Charlotte's Web, which I love that book,
yeah,
and I do think that's a great model for children about the connection to animals, right? It's a beautiful book about connecting to animals in a very deep way. But if you were to say to someone, or someone came to you who was new to the practice, and it was like, I want to connect to bees, or I want to connect to a spider or any creature, what kind of tip or trick or advice would you give them in terms of how to make that connection?
so I always think that one of the fundamental qualities of connecting to another species that isn't our own is that we very quickly have to evaluate that we can't use our vocal cords in the same way for communication, and they may have either no vocal cords or a completely different set of vocal cords. So we have to evaluate and consider, okay, so how do I connect with this particular being in a space in which we meet, where, you know, where two beings meet on a particular stage of life. And the thing that we all have in common is this amorphous thing called life. And when we meet on that stage, I believe that there is a mode of communication that all species on the planet, from the tallest sequoia tree to the smallest insect, and that's emotional response and emotional interaction. And whilst I guess it would be almost impossible for us to say whether a bee actually has emotional responses, they've certainly seen that with the relationships that people have developed with spiders, where a spider will respond almost to a keeper that is keeping them safe. So I think for me, I evoke a feeling of emotion that I want to direct towards that being in a manner of introducing myself and perhaps getting to know a little bit more about those. So I will foster an emotional state that I can then direct towards that individual. And in all of my time doing that, I've found that to be immensely effective. And I think when we quieten ourselves down and we listen to the music and the song of our emotions, that we can send those out in waves. And however small or however big another individual being is, it's also capable of doing the same. And whilst, you know, those interactions can only ever be predominantly subjective to the experience of the practitioner, I've never found an occasion where that has let me down. And, you know, I knew on Monday, I knew that Bettina wanted the window opening, because I felt a certain nostalgia, but I also felt a certain gratitude, like, thank you.
I guess.
You know,
But I'm not going to make you jealous or anything, but I have to show you my collection of pillows.
oh Lord.
One, two,
Word, that's
three,
gorgeous.
three.
Ah, ah,
I've got spiders everywhere.
I love,
Oh my gosh.
yeah,
I
but
have to get back to writing. I want to talk to you for the next hour about
yes.
spiders and about bees. But I want to thank you so much, Kristoffer, for being here, for sharing that beautiful tip. You can find any place you buy your decks, your books, and everything. I got Kristoffer's beautiful deck and all of his books. I mean, he has amazing books as well. I want to remind everybody that The Witch's Guide to Animal Familiars is out now, and we're having a cutest familiar photo contest right now. If you go to animalfamiliars.com, everybody who enters and will get a prize, but we have a really big first, second, and third prize that you can read about going on animalfamiliars.com. A 1 hour reading with me. How about a $100 gift certificate to the Parlor of Wonders? I mean, there's some good prizes there, and everybody who enters gets a prize. You know, I'm always about giving everybody everything. So go check that out by going to animalfamiliars.com, but also check out Kristoffer's work, including the beautiful bee tarot. Oh my gosh, I
Oh,
love this deck so much. I was like, there are some, don't you have that thing where there's some books or decks that are coming out and you get that Llewellyn catalog and you're like,
oh,
I have to wait 6 months for that? I want it
oh my God. Tends to happen every year, and every January I tell myself no more tarot decks. I
now. Yeah,
fail.
I know, that is really, you know, you're just punishing yourself by saying that. I think what you need to manifest in the beginning of the year is more space
Yeah,
for tarot decks. That's what you.
yeah. More space. Thankfully, we have the Anglesey Druid Order's office, which is a very large office. So I've been able to migrate so many of my tarot decks down there because we run tea and tarot classes and
Wonderful.
workshops. So that's been, so we had to manifest that though. That was certainly manifesting.
See, yeah, you can manifest more space for more decks. Listen, don't limit yourself.
So, what, Paganicon? Sacred Space?
What?
I'll see you at Paganicon.
Oh, are you going to Paganicon this year?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I was going to ask you that. And I thought, oh, no way. Is he coming out? Yes, I'm going to be at PaganaCon. I'll see you. Oh my gosh, that is so exciting. We can continue our conversation one-on-one. We could just talk for an hour and a half about spiders and bees. Let's do it. Let's make that plan.
Thank you ever so much. And good luck with literally see the reflection of mine on the screen screaming, finish it.
I know. Oh my gosh. Let's get back to work, both of us. We'll make that commitment. We're going to get back to work. Thank you so much for in this busy time for coming and joining me. And you are a delight. I just adore you. And I cannot wait to see you in a month. Yay. I'm going to see you in a month.
Just a few weeks.
Yes, a
All
few
right.
wetake And if you guys are there at PaganaCon, we'll both see you.
Yeah.
It'll be fun. So hopefully we'll see you there. All
Oh,
right, Kristoffer, take care.
all right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.